This happened in the autumn of 2023. I was 24 at the time and had recently moved to a remote part of high desert New Mexico. I'd taken a job as a night shift security guard for a massive 800-acre utility-scale solar farm called Helios Valley. The pay was incredible, $28 an hour just to sit in a climate-controlled booth and occasionally drive a rugged electric golf cart around the perimeter. Because the facility was so expansive and technically critical infrastructure, they needed a human presence 24/7. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. If you've never been to a solar farm at night, it's one of the eeriest places on Earth. There are tens of thousands of massive rectangular glass panels mounted on motorized trackers. During the day, they move silently to follow the sun. At night, they stow. They tilt into a flat horizontal position about 4 feet off the ground to protect themselves from wind. It looks like a literal sea of black glass stretching into the darkness. The first glitch. The facility was surrounded by 2 layers of 10-foot chain link fence topped with razor wire. I spent most of my time in the command center, a small modular building with a wall of monitors showing feeds from 50 different infrared cameras. About 3 weeks into the job, I noticed a tracking error on the system. The solar panels are organized into rows, and each row is controlled by a central motor. At 2 a.m., the system alerted me that row 84, in the far southeast corner of the property, had moved out of stow position. I looked at the camera for row 84. In the grainy black and white infrared, I could see one single panel out of a row of 40 tilted at a 45-degree angle. It was facing directly toward the command center, miles away. I thought it was a mechanical failure. I logged the error and scheduled a technician for the morning. But the next night, at exactly 2 a.m., it happened again. This time, it was row 83. The panel was tilted at the exact same angle, facing my booth. In the third night, I decided to drive out there. The southeast corner was the most isolated part of the property, backed up against a jagged canyon that was supposedly inaccessible. I drove the golf cart slowly, the electric motor whirring quietly. As I approached row 82, my headlights panned across the underside of the panels. Most of the area under the panels is just gravel and wiring, but as I passed the tilted panel, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. Hanging from the steel support beam of the tilted panel was a small handmade wind chime. It wasn't made of metal, it was made of bleached animal bones, small vertebrae and ribs strung together with copper wiring stolen from the facility. I stepped out of the cart, my flashlight beam shaking. I looked under the panels of row 82. There, in the dirt, was a nest. Someone had cleared away the gravel and laid down a tattered sleeping bag. Surrounding the bag were dozens of empty gallon jugs of water and, most disturbingly, a stack of my own discarded shift logs from the previous 2 weeks. I must have thrown them in the bin outside the booth, and someone had gone through the trash to find them. I realized then that whoever was living here wasn't just a squatter. They were watching the rhythm of the facility. They were manually overriding the motors on the panels to create sight lines so they could watch the command center from their nest. The lockdown. I scrambled back into the golf cart and floored it toward the command center. I needed to call the site manager and the police, but as I was halfway across the 800-acre lot, the lights in the distance, the ones illuminating my booth, suddenly went dark. The command center had its own backup battery, so it shouldn't have lost power. I checked my handheld radio. "Base, this is Mark. Do you copy?" Static. Then a voice came through. It wasn't the site manager, it was a raspy, low whisper that sounded like it was coming from someone who hadn't spoken in years. "The glass is cold tonight, Mark. Why don't you come back under?" I nearly crashed the cart. I realized the person had hacked into the local radio frequency or stolen a handheld unit from the charging station. I didn't answer. I reached the command center, bolted inside, and locked the heavy steel door. I looked at the monitors. The entire system was haywire. On the screen, I watched as row after row began to tilt. It looked like a wave of glass rising up. Within minutes, hundreds of panels were standing vertically, creating a literal labyrinth of glass between me and the exit gate. Then, the monitor for the front door clicked on. Standing right outside the command center, staring directly into the lens, was a man. He was wearing a tattered technician's jumpsuit from a company that had gone bankrupt 10 years ago. His face was sun-scorched and leathery, and he was holding a laptop that was wired directly into the external maintenance port of the building. He wasn't trying to break in, he was just typing. My computer screen in the booth flickered. A single document opened. It was a map of the facility, but it had been modified. There were red dots everywhere. I realized they were camera blind spots. He'd mapped out every single square inch of the 800 acres where the cameras couldn't see him. The last line of the document said, "I've been here since the beginning. You're the first one who looked under the glass." The escape. I didn't wait for him to finish whatever he was doing. I knew the command center had an emergency manual override for the front gate. I hit the button, grabbed my keys, and sprinted for my personal truck behind the building. As I drove out, I had to weave through the maze of tilted panels. It was like driving through a hall of mirrors. Everywhere I looked, my headlights reflected on the black glass, making it impossible to see if someone was just standing around the corner. As I reached the main gate, I saw him one last time. He was standing on top of one of the inverter housings, holding up a single bleached bone whistle. He blew into it, and the sound was a high, piercing shriek that cut through the desert wind. The aftermath. The police arrived 30 minutes later, but the technician was long gone. They searched the nest and found that he had been living under the panels for at least 3 years. He'd spliced into the high voltage lines to power his equipment and had been using the facility's satellite link to run a series of bizarre encrypted websites. The most terrifying thing they found was a hidden compartment in the nest. Inside was a Polaroid camera and a box of photos. They weren't just of me, they were photos of every single night shift guard who had worked there for the last 36 months. He documented our arrival times, what we ate for lunch, and even what we listened to on the radio. Underneath my photo, he had written, "He noticed row 84, time to move." The company ended up firing the entire security firm and replacing us with an automated drone surveillance system. I didn't fight it. I took a job at a grocery store in the city, where the lights are always bright and there are no rows of glass to hide under. I still don't like the desert at night, and whenever I see a solar panel on someone's roof, I don't think about clean energy. I think about that raspy voice on the radio and the thousands of acres of dark, silent glass where someone could be living right beneath your feet, watching you through the reflections.